Okay, let's now in our Philippines-China focus segment look at this issue closely because some quarters in our society have been on the campaign trail to compel the next administration to commit to this arbitral arbitration case. For example, in particular, Justice Carpio has been going around the circuit, Rotary clubs, schools, NGOs, and other institutions, campaigning and crusading for this arbitration case and insisting that the next administration must carry this on. So, on the one hand, as I said earlier, some say this is leverage. On the other hand, Estelito Mendoza says this is not leverage. This is tying the hands of the next administration for possible deals with China. And my take here is, in fact, this is a leverage that the country can use vis-a-vis America to loosen its stranglehold on our foreign policy. Senator.
Well, this is a very big geopolitical issue. And therefore, there are many parties trying to cash in, trying to come in. But what's important, Mentong, is that you will have a new administration. It will have a new foreign policy structure, a new foreign secretary. And one thing that can be done, I think, is to make sure that you don't have a foreign secretary and a defense secretary who are talking like master sergeants when they discuss China. Yeah. And this has been one of our most serious problems. As though we were ready to go to war against China without thinking that if we should win that war, we cannot afford to feed the 1.3 billion Chinese. So you have to give the new administration breathing space to look at this problem and how to maximize the potentials of Philippine-Chinese economic relations. China is the biggest economic giant in this part of the world, probably in the world in the next few years. And what are we doing? We're cutting ourselves off just because of a maritime dispute that cannot be solved in a few years. Because let us remember the fact that there are very few territorial disputes that are ever solved within a few years or even within the lifetime of the leaders of one nation.
Yeah. And Secretary, anything to add to that?
Well, I agree, of course, but maybe we should refrain from getting bogged down and looking at this particular issue as a single issue. There are so many issues that are tied up to this dispute between these territorial disputes with China. We must look at this problem as a multifaceted problem, considering what is going on around the world, and not just as if though it was a China against the Philippines issue. Even the fact that if you were to imagine China Sea as a big lake, and you have Philippines on one side, you have Malaysia on this, and you have Vietnam on that, Laos on the other, and then you have Taiwan here and China on the other. These are the countries that are, let's say, stakeholders as far as the China Sea is concerned. Even if it has always been used as a area for navigation, so that there is navigation of goods and all the way from the Middle East, because through the Malacca Straits, there is no threat and no intention, in as far as that's concerned, to constrain that particular route. So we have to look at that, and also we have to look at the instability that is now going on around the world, and figure out what are the protagonists and what countries are involved. You have, as you mentioned, Russia, China, and India, who have said what their interests are here, and it should be discussed in the proper forum. On the other hand, you've got United States bringing in 60% of their naval might in this area, supposedly to protect what? Freedom of navigation. Do you need 60% of the biggest naval fleet in the world to guard the navigation here when there is no threat of that? So we have to understand all of these things before we make a decision
Yes.
as a sovereign nation.
Kit, you have anything to add before I
Yes, we're
go to
talking
the
of
next?
freedom of navigation.
Yeah.
Freedom of navigation could be ensured under the law of the sea. And it's ironic that the greatest military power in the region is not a signatory to
The UNCLOS. The
law of the
UNCLOS.
sea.
Yeah.
Law of the sea,
And every time we talk about this, it is this great part talks about freedom of navigation.
Right.
But really, the sphere of influence issue is at the core of all this. No? What kind of influence should China have in this part of the world? Some experts talk of China overtaking the U.S. Military power in a few years. There is one author, I think his name is Professor Winchester, who talks of equivalence as the only thing that China wants. China does not want to overtake the U.S.
Yes, yes.
presence here.
Yes.
It only wants to be given what is due her.
Yes.
And that should not be too hard. to
Yes.
grant.
Well, in fact, there's a question of the superstructure of relations of the powers in the globe, and the two contending poles are one, the unipolar universe that the United States rules today, and the other is the initiative from Russia, India, and China forming BRICS,
Right.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to create a multipolar world, meaning a world with more centers of power. And the principle here is very simple. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we have seen how in the past 30 years, and particularly the past 20 years, how the United States, being the remaining and sole superpower, launched wars against Yugoslavia and then Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. We know the history of the past 20 years. Maybe a multipolar world where there is a greater degree of balance of powers can prevent such abuse of military might. Reactions from...
unaccountable power is always dangerous, Mento. Whether you're talking of political leaders within a country or a nation within a community of nations. So the polar approach will always be good for everybody.
My problem is in the Philippine foreign policy community and in society in general, in our media, in our academic institutions, this multipolar world concept is not being discussed.
No, it's not being discussed because forgive me if I digress a little
Please
bit
go ahead,
on
please
the
go ahead,
on the
yeah.
multipolar concept. Multipolar concept means there will be several other powers that are supposed to be. But rather than calling it multipolar, I would rather call it a community of sovereign nation states. Okay, and working in collaboration for a common objective, which means the development of the whole population of the world. In contrast to what China, India, and Russia have been pushing in the AIIB and the BRICS Bank, in contrast to that, which is a collaboration for economic development for the whole world, the US, the British, and certain people of their allies are going through a certain doctrine, like if you are not with us, then you are against us. If you are not with us, if you're not our allies, then you are our enemies.
That's
okay?
biblical.
Now, that is the kind of position that the U.S. and the British have taken. No? Now, and therefore, these two ideas will be in conflict. It becomes more dangerous in as far as the present situation is concerned, because over and above these two conflicting ideas is a collapsing global financial and economic system, as we can already see in the transatlantic region. You've got whole countries, whole economies now going down in the whole of Europe, and the U.S. itself is unable to get out. No? When you've got financial policies like helicopter money going to be printed out loosely, or bail-ins, which means taking over deposits of depositors in banks and sequestering them in effect, no, because of your financial condition. We are in a very, very dangerous situation. That is what's happening in the Western world. Asia, however, because of geography and because of proper, maybe history, no, is so far not yet too much affected by this economic situation, but it will come, and therefore, before this thing, and when this thing happens, you can see why people are very scared that a global conflict might be imminent.
Yeah, Kit?
Well, I don't believe, Butch, you can long sustain this old paradigm of Western military superiority. I have just read a statement from a very high-ranking official of the U.S. military saying that in the past, the U.S. was capable of fighting in 2.5 theaters at the same time. Today, according to this military officer, they may have difficulty fighting at a single theater. So the economic decline has really changed a lot of things in that theater. So, okay, the old rhetoric is still there, but these are the new realities.
Yeah, I'm afraid that many Filipinos are being sold a flawed argument that China will be isolated because of this case and so on, when the reverse is happening. As we have mentioned, Russia, India, several other countries have already said it is better not to internationalize such issues, and better to have bilateral negotiations. And the other argument is that, well, the U.S. is still the sole superpower, and they are guaranteeing because of our mutual defense treaty. Yet we have been frustrated again and again by the apparent soft, ironclad guarantees of the United States. So we're going to go back to this issue and take a more positive outlook on the future of Asia and the world, and a discussion of the proposal for rebuilding the entire world's economy, which is the New Silk Road or the land bridge. No?
Yeah.
We're going to take this break first.